do you believe that your family should apologize for their own role in the 1953 coup? Forget America, but you have a say in your own families.
I leave it to the historian to determine what it was, but usually a coup is from below to the top, not from the top to down. That's number one. Number two, I have heard the terminology used sometimes by some saying that a democratically elected government of Mossadegh. If anybody studies the Iranian constitution of the time clearly, the prime minister was never elected. He was either appointed by the king, subject to parliament ratification, or vice versa, suggested by parliament, accepted by the king. There was not a process of if you win elections. To suggest that that one was a coup is to suggest that every single change of prime ministership in Iran must have been a coup too. If that's the case, then we had coup d'etats every other year. So think, study, understand what the constitution at the time was, and that's as much as I have to say on the subject. But I tell you one last thing, apart from that, because probably there would be impossible to achieve any consensus on this subject, if not forever, for a long time. But I have a constructive suggestion to my fellow compatriots. And that is that, first of all, it would have been impossible to say that whether it was my father or Prime Minister Mossadegh, that they were both right or both wrong. But the question is, what would have been the determining mechanism to say whether it was constitutional or not? A little bit like you have here with the Supreme Court, whether an act of the executive or anybody else is constitutional or not, therefore avoiding constitutional crisis. We did not have at the time any apparatus that could have said, oh, the farman of the king was against the law, or vice versa, the refusal to be set aside by the prime minister was against the law. What entity was supposed to step in and make that determination? What if the orders carried out by military officers, whether it was following the order of the king or the prime minister, would be spared court-martial or a threat of it by going against such order, should that order have been illegal, for instance? What I'm trying to say here is that the lesson we should learn for the future is to have mechanisms and instances that can intervene should there be any kind of constitutional crisis as such. It could be something similar to what the Supreme Court here is, completely separate in the checks and balance system from the legislation and executive. It could be an element that the French have, for instance, Conseil Constitutionnel, which is yet another apparatus to foresee all that. That ought to be what we need to implement towards the future. Because at the end of the day, no matter what our opinion was on what happened 70 years ago, is not going to alter the fact that we need to have safeguards for the future to prevent some issues to happen, regardless of what side of the argument we're on. And that's why I think part of what needs to be considered by the Constituent Assembly as they work on the next constitution is to also anticipate these safeguards and built-in mechanisms that will provide the nation with yet another layer of protection to make sure that no one deviates from the law, that no one is above the law, and not a simple act committed can create a crisis that has been so disruptive in the progress of a nation. That should be our lesson learned. So rather than opining on what happened, I'm proposing a mechanism to bring more safeguards towards the future. And I hope that those who have to work on this as experts, constitutional lawyers and what have you, will really think about this and understand that one of the reasons why democracies survive is that power is not concentrated in any branch whatsoever. At least that's what we've learned across the planet so far. And that there is beyond, by the way, beyond just the structure of state and governance, additional protection. Labor unions, free press, all other mechanisms that people can use so whistleblowers or watchdogs are not muzzled. Because if somebody is trying to brush it under the rug and hide it, as the saying goes, you can fool some of the people all the time, most of the people, most of the time, some of the time, but you cannot fool all of the people all of the time. And at the end, it becomes access to truth and fact. And again, part of this is media. So choose what you cover and how you cover it to see whether or not we can come with a solution rather than to simply tease arguments that have been divisive and not constructive towards a better future that all Iranians can benefit for, even if they disagreed on something that happened before. I think it's important that we agree on what we need to do for our future for the sake of all and not just some, of a group versus the other. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.